In this episode, we talk about the Enforcement Directorate investigating the leaders of the Aam Aadmi Party in Goa and Punjab. We also discuss the concerns raised by the country's cybersecurity agency. But first, we talk about the arguments for and against nuclear energy. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last week, Brussels hosted a first-of-its-kind nuclear energy summit that was billed as the most high-profile international meeting on nuclear energy ever. The event was attended by representatives from 30 countries, including a few heads of state. The idea behind this event was to build momentum and to pitch nuclear energy as an important solution to global problems like climate change and energy security. And this is because despite having been around for a number of years now, the demand for nuclear energy hasn't really picked up, at least not to the extent to which its proponents would like. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who writes on science and technology for the paper, about the reasons behind this. Amitabh, tell us what have been the arguments in favor of nuclear energy, especially when we compare it to fossil fuels?
So, nuclear is a clean energy. That's its biggest USP. It doesn't produce any emissions, at least during operation. Now, the whole life cycle obviously has some emissions because you need to mine the raw material, uranium. So the mining operation would have some carbon footprint. There are other places where electricity would be needed. And the source of that electricity, the source of raw materials, the source of other activities that lead or that make the operation possible. So those might have a carbon footprint, but just the nuclear energy part, generation of energy, that does not produce any carbon emissions or very negligible amount of carbon emissions.
Yeah, in fact, in coal-fired electricity, for example, the emissions are 100 times more.
Yes. In coal or any other fossil fuel, like when you're burning oil or even natural gas, you are burning something and that burning process produces emissions. Here, you are not burning anything. You are splitting the nucleus of the atom, and that process in itself does not produce any emissions. So that's the biggest USP of nuclear energy. It has been around for quite some time, at least 75 years now. So the technology is also quite mature. There are lots of countries who are using it. The other advantage, of course, is unlike, say, solar or wind or other types of renewable energy, it also doesn't suffer from seasonality. Nuclear energy can be available anytime, just like fossil fuels. Now, if you have the fuel, if you have petrol or if you have gas, whatever, if you have coal, you can produce power anytime. Similarly, if you have uranium, you can produce power anytime. Unlike, say, solar or wind, for which you need to have sunlight available or optimum amount of wind energy available to be able to do that. And that's not always available. So there is a seasonality attached to other sources of renewable energy. By the way, nuclear is clean, but it's not a renewable source of energy. So that's a distinction. So sometimes when we talk about renewable energies, sometimes people do include nuclear as well. But most of the times there is a distinction between renewable and nuclear.
Right, because when we talk about renewable energy, we are talking about energy derived from natural sources that can be constantly replenished. For example, solar or wind. These are things we know won't run out. But when it comes to nuclear, there is a limited amount of uranium, for example.
Yes, there is a limited amount of uranium, although a very small amount of uranium can produce large amounts of energy. Even that limited amount actually does lead to the molecule to molecule, probably nuclear, produces much more. But that's a different kind of debate. The idea about nuclear is that one, it is clean, and two, as I said, because it doesn't have seasonality attached to it, therefore it can actually be a potential replacement for fossil fuels in terms of becoming the base load source of energy, so that it can be operated anytime.
Okay, so despite this clearly big advantage over fossil fuels, what is the reason that it has not been utilized more?
So, if you have to just look at one reason, of course, it's the safety concerns over nuclear. I mean, that's the biggest apprehension that a lot of countries continue to have. Besides the fact that even though, as I say, I mean, it has been around for 70, 75 years, the technology is fairly mature. People know how to handle radioactive stuff. People know how to operate these power plants. And there has been a reasonably the proponents of nuclear energy will always point out that, look, during operation, there has never been an accident. I mean, there has never been a problem. The problems have happened because of some accident like in Fukushima or Chernobyl. But the safety record of nuclear, they would point out, is much, much better than any other source of energy. I mean, coal-fired power plants or oil, natural gas, anything. That ways you have, the safety record is much better. But just the potential risk that is attached to nuclear energy, that continues to be a problem for a lot of countries. Now, of course, there are other things as well. It's, capital intensive. It requires a huge amount of paraphernalia. I mean, it's not as simple as a coal-fired power plant. It's a much sophisticated system that you need. Then the whole thing about nuclear material, leakage of nuclear material and its potential to be used for non-peaceful purposes, for military purposes. So all those do create extra layers of complication, even though there are managed systems that are in place for several years now and it is working. So in the countries that do make use of nuclear energy, I mean, they are doing sort of well. I mean, they are managing it well. We have not had any problematic incident in any of the countries that have been using nuclear energy for generating electricity.
Right. And the other thing that also remains a concern is the radioactive waste that is generated while using nuclear energy, right? Because there is no sustainable way that one can dispose it.
Yes. I mean, so that's another thing that's often talked about. So what do you do of nuclear? What do you do with nuclear waste? So what we are doing currently, we are just managing it. We are just keeping it in sort of safe houses. And because the amount of nuclear waste is not very high, it's still manageable that you can store it somewhere. You do not know what to do with it or how to deal with it. And the idea is that in future, if nuclear energy expands many-fold, as a lot of people say it should, then storing nuclear waste can become a problem. Now, again, the proponents of nuclear energy say there are safe ways to do that. You can keep it underground, you can keep it in other places where you can keep it safely for, say, hundreds of years and there won't be any problem. But yes, I mean, there is a potential with regard to future. But, because the nuclear fuel is relatively, very small amount. So as of now, for the foreseeable future, there is no problem storing the waste. It's only about, much deeper into the future that people talk it as a potential threat.
And Amitabh, the climate conferences have always kept a safe distance from the nuclear industry. But that seems to be changing now. Talk about what we have seen in that regard.
So this entire thing on climate change, the entire argument on climate change is that we need to put a stop to fossil fuel use and then replace fossil fuels with something more clean. Right. So it's about transition to cleaner sources of energy and the options that are there. We have discussed it. It's mainly solar and wind and different kinds of solar and wind combinations and, some part of hydro here and there. And biogas, of course, biofuels, those kind of things, which are relatively cleaner than fossil fuels and they can be deployed at large scale. So, I mean, nuclear is an option in this entire calculus, just that nuclear is not a favored option. And as you rightly said, till now, when the climate conferences or the climate negotiations happen, these have usually kept nuclear at a safe distance. And a lot of the people who are engaged in the climate conversations, they are not very huge fans of nuclear as well. So, I mean, they would reluctantly agree to some sort of deployment, a small portion coming from nuclear as well, but not nuclear as the mainstay of a country's, power generating capacity. That, as you say, yes, it's been changing in the last few years. In the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen, at least at the climate conferences, there has been a greater engagement with the nuclear stakeholders. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the international nuclear watchdog, sort of an international regulator on everything to do with nuclear energy. So they have started to come at these climate conferences. They have been holding these side events. They have been talking. They have been promoting energy. So there is a little shift that is happening. See, mainly because the kind of the pace at which this transition should have happened from fossil fuels to cleaner sources, that hasn't happened. And the climate crisis has become graver, and it's become much more urgent now than it was, say, 10 years ago. So probably because of that, the nuclear industry, as well as other people who are proponents of nuclear energy, who are ardent believers in nuclear energy, they have been saying, look, this is a technology that is already available, is proven, it's already deployed, it can take care of your base load, and fewer amount of reactors would probably be able to supply electricity to large towns, cities, that can take care of your entire electricity demands. And therefore, we should give it a shot. In the short term, this is the best solution that is available to us.
Yeah, and even though there has been a growing interest, we haven't really seen it being translated on ground. And in fact, the meeting in Brussels was also not meant to produce any agreement. It was just another attempt to build momentum. But when we're talking about utilizing nuclear energy, could you talk about India's stance on it?
So we have been using nuclear energy for fairly long time, at least since the 50s, 60s. But again, even in India, if you see, the growth has been fairly slow. Last year only, we were just about 6,400 megawatts. That was barely 2 or 3% of India's total electricity was coming from nuclear. We are now expanding. In 2015, we gave clearance to setting up of 10 more reactors. That would, just double our nuclear installed capacity, and more is in the offing. So, but India is one of the countries which is still expanding. Not many countries are expanding. Germany famously, shut down its nuclear reactors 2 years ago. But there are countries whose dependence on nuclear energy is huge. France, of course, some 70% of France's total electricity comes from nuclear. So we generate just about 3, 4, 5%. They do about 70% of their electricity from nuclear. There are other smaller countries in Europe which also do 60, 65% from nuclear. But I mean, there are not more than 30 countries that make use of nuclear energy.
And next we talk about the Enforcement Directorate investigating the members of the Aam Aadmi Party. At a time when the founder of the party, Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, is lodged in Tihar jail after being arrested by the Enforcement Directorate in the Delhi excise policy case, the central agency has also been investigating and probing its members in both Goa and Punjab. In Goa, the investigation pertains to the Delhi excise policy scam, where kickbacks were allegedly demanded from liquor businessmen in exchange for favors. Meanwhile, in Punjab, the ED is probing an entirely different scam as well. Now, when it comes to Goa, the ED says that the bribes received from the so-called South Group, essentially a group of individuals from South India, were routed and funneled into the party's election campaign in Goa in 2022. This is the year when AAP had won 2 seats, both from South Goa. When we spoke to Indian Express's Pavneet Singh Chadha, he told us more about it.
So we got to know of all these details in the remand note filed by ED when they were seeking Delhi Chief Minister's remand. And in that remand application, the Enforcement Directorate has mentioned that there were some politicians, businessmen and middlemen who basically paid money to give undue benefits for the excise policy, and significant chunk of that money, the number that has been put is about 45 crores, was used in the poll campaign in Goa. The charge that ED is making is that a lot of these vendors who were engaged by a media company which was roped in to manage Goa's election campaign, a lot of these payments were made in cash.
And the accusation is that this was the money that the Aam Aadmi Party had received from the South Group in the form of bribes.
It found these cash payments were made to some of the work done for the Aam Aadmi Party by people who were employed as survey workers, area managers, assembly managers during the poll campaign. So the chain ultimately, ED says that it was overall managed by Aam Aadmi Party MLA Durgesh Pathak. There is a mention of Vijay Nair, and ultimately it leads up to the Aam Aadmi Party convener and Manish Sisodia also. Now the significant part where there is a clear mention of one of the Aam Aadmi Party candidates is again in the remand note, where the ED claims that all this charge of cash proceeds making its way to the election campaign in Goa has been corroborated by one of the candidates of Aam Aadmi Party. Now they have not mentioned any candidate, but they've left it vague.
He says that after this charge was made, the ED summoned 4 people from Goa. 2 from the Aam Aadmi Party, including the party chief, 1 former BJP spokesperson, and a person named Ashok Nayak, who is a leader from the Bhandari community, which constitutes the majority of the OBCs in the state. But Pavneet points out that it's not just Nayak, but the other 3 people summoned were also from the Bhandari community.
And the idea, at least from an outside perspective, it was that, when you're questioning the proceeds of crime regarding the poll campaign, the questioning and the line of questioning to the Aam Aadmi Party leaders was mostly around managing the poll expenses. For instance, Ramrao Wagh told me that very specific questions were asked to him regarding what were the circumstances in which he joined the party, how much money was spent, how did he arrange the money. There was no mention about that, this is directly linked to the South group or something, but simply, and all these 4 leaders who were questioned were also asked to furnish their bank statements for the last 5 years. So this is basically the ED's line of questioning mostly revolved around the election campaign of Goa in 2022. And regarding the poll expenses, while the questioning was going on, we saw some of these leaders come out and get those documents that was being asked about. And the questioning lasted for about 6 to 7 hours that day. But like I said, one curious link that emerged that day was that all the 4 leaders who were summoned were part of the Bhandari community.
Now from Goa, we head north to Punjab, where the party came to power in 2022. There, the ED officials have raided a number of AAP members, including the party's Mohali MLA Kulwant Singh and the party's excise commissioner Varun Rujam. When we spoke to Indian Express's Kanchan Vasdev, who reports on the state for the paper, she told us that what's interesting about Rujam is that his wife is said to be the beneficiary of another scam involving a guava orchard.
So that is why it is that the buzz is that these 2 policies will be joined at some point. One scam and the other scam would have a bridge. Because I told you that the commissioner is the same. Commissioner Varun Rujam's wife is an accused in the guava scam, and Commissioner Excise Varun Rujam is the person who has prepared the policy of the liquor and the excise. So that is the common factor.
She says that the guava orchard scam is said to be worth 137 crore rupees. And took place last year in Mohali's Bakarpur village.
It was a fraud centered in Bakarpur village in Mohali, where the ED began its raids this time. They said that there is a nexus between officers of horticulture and revenue departments, the Greater Mohali Area Development Authority, also called GAMADA, and private individuals. The Vigilance Bureau had alleged that in 2016-17, the state government and GAMADA officials had prior knowledge of the upcoming land acquisitions, and they purchased land strategically and planted guava trees in large numbers to inflate the compensation amount. And they manipulated the records, claiming that the trees were planted in 2016, when in reality they were planted in 2018, because it wanted to show them that they were 2 years old by that time. This allowed them to extract more money, crores in illegal compensation. Like if you buy a guava sapling today, it will not cost you more than 200 rupees, right? But if you say that the guava planted was 2 years ago, then the compensation for the plant would be like 2,000 to 2,500 rupees. So that's how the compensation amount increased to crores. So the trees they were planted, they were shown to be big trees in the papers, but actually they were not.
So far, 33 people have been arrested in this case, and the ED is keeping a close eye on Varun Rujam, who they believe could provide a link to them to both these scams. Meanwhile, with the Lok Sabha polls around the corner, Kanchan says the situation for the party remains tense.
So Punjab will go to polls on 1st of June. So if any of our leaders are arrested, then it may have a bearing on the elections. And they will all say that, these people are involved. And the way the ED came to Punjab and raided all these premises, and then Varun Rujam was also called to Delhi and questioned the next day, it seems that something is on. And it looks like that they are going to do something in the coming future.
And in the end, we talk about a cybersecurity concern. Earlier this week on Tuesday, the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, the country's cybersecurity agency, issued a warning about a high security flaw that allows remote code execution attacks on a wide range of Apple products. These concerns affect older versions of iOS, iPad OS, Mac OS, and even Vision OS for the Vision Pro headset. Pretty much every recent iPhone, iPad, and Mac laptop and desktop is impacted if not updated. Apple has already pushed out patches, so making sure your software is fully updated is crucial. But this does not mean that Android users are safe from this. Yesterday, the response team disclosed multiple vulnerabilities impacting Android 12 through the latest version 14 that allow escalated privileges, information disclosure, and denial of service attacks. Like Apple, these issues have also been marked high on the severity scale. The flaws exist in various components like Android framework and MediaTek drivers, though thankfully these issues have been patched as well as part of the April security patch. Now, Android manufacturers are typically slower when seeding security patches rolled out by Google to their devices. However, if the issues are indeed as serious as the response team has labeled them to be, we can expect the April update for your Android phone or tablet to roll out quicker than usual. So do keep a lookout for any new updates rolling onto your devices. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.